Today's video is all about leather fragrances, elegant and classy versus bold and brutish. Hello, welcome back to Seldomly Off, and I'm Daniel. Today we're talking fragrances, and this is a first impression comparison between Matiere Premiere's Falcon Leather and Orto Parisi's Cuoium. In this video series, I compare and give my first impressions on two fragrances, usually in sample form, that I chose to cover a specific topic. This is not a fragrance battle. We're not here to define which of the two fragrances is better. We're here to talk about the wear experience and open the conversation. During my time filming these videos, I started noticing a behavioral pattern within me. I go through categories of fragrances. There was that rose phase where I really started exploring rose fragrances as a whole. I went through a brief fougere phase, and now I'm really into leathers once again. I really like exploring leathers. And recently I put out a review of Armani Privé's Noir Kogan, which is a very classy yet rustic and gritty leather. Today we're going to be exploring two more leather fragrances. These also fall into the category of gritty leather. These should be far removed from your very smooth suede type of leather that you might find in something like Memo Paris African leather, or even on the base note of a lot of fragrances. Even something like Yves Saint Laurent Baby Cat has a suede note. These are more rustic and leather forward, or at least they should be. And within the gritty category that we're going to be exploring today, I chose two very different approaches. On one side, we have Matiere Premiere's Falcon Leather. Matiere Premiere is a house that has a very classy and elegant approach. They usually focus on one note, and they emphasize that note with minor supporting ingredients. I tried a few of their fragrances, the standouts being Radical Rose, which I actually have a review up for. The other one being a Parisian Musk, a very creamy, sensual, elegant fig fragrance. It's really beautiful and definitely worth a try. Falcon Leather has been on my radar for a really long time. I really like the concept. Apparently this is inspired by the Falconeers and their leather gloves. So I don't know, it just sounds unique and it sounds really cool. Also because in the notes for this, there's birch tar, which I am a huge fan of. There's also the usual saffron, which is a strong culprit to give the leather type of impression. Given my experience with the Matiere Premiere approach, I'm expecting this to be very elegant and very wearable, in great contrast with our next fragrance. The other contender in this video is none other than Orto Parisi's Cuoium. Orto Parisi is a brand by Alessandro Gualtieri, the creator and the perfumer of his other brand, Nasomatto, which is arguably a little bit more known. Orto Parisi is a very edgy, bold, and narrative type of brand. Their fragrances really revolve around storytelling. Usually it's about Italian rural lifestyle. They're all inspired by Alessandro Gualtieri's grandfather, Mr. Parisi, and his manual labor in the fields and around the house. Cuoium is supposed to be a love letter to Mr. Parisi's shoes. This fragrance is known to be very animalic, very primal, very rough. I have smelled this a little bit in the past, but I've never given it a full wear. My extremely limited experience with these fragrances also translates to Falcon Leather. I have never given this a full wear. I only sprayed this in the air to see if the atomizer worked because I've been having some troubles lately with atomizers and samples, so I really want to make sure that these work beforehand. Nonetheless, I can't wait to smell this and to compare this to Orto Parisi Cuoium. Before we start, let me just remind you how all this works. I'll be spraying these two directly on skin, talking about the very first opening, talking a little bit about my experiences with the houses. Then I'll probably step away for a bit. It's usually between 1 and 3 hours. I'll come back, talk about the dry down, talk about the evolution of the scent, give my forecast on longevity, value for money, and use cases. This is all very experimental. This is all first impression comparison. A lot of these fragrances evolve a lot, especially the Orto Parisi. These are fragrances that require a lot of wears to be properly understood, but I'll do my best in this brief time. After the usual lengthy introduction, I say we get right to it. I'll be spraying Falcon Leather on my left arm and Cuoium on my right arm. I know these samples very well. 2 sprays of this will be more than enough to be able to test the fragrance. So here we go. 1 and 2. Okay, I already pick it up in the air. Very beautiful stuff. I love this type of leather. I love the roughness of this type of leather. Immediately, it kind of reminds me of Noir Kogan by Armani Privé. It has the same sort of very straightforward leather aspect to it. As I mentioned, the projection is very good. This is very strong in the air. The scent comes across as bitter, gritty, and very elegant actually. Up close, the scent is definitely surprising me. It's way rougher than I was expecting. It's bitter, it's harsh, it's pungent in a way. It's very, very animalic. Not animalic in the sense of like poopy or pissy, but it has this very photorealistic leather component. The leather in here is the type of leather that reminds me of like wet leather. And when you wet a piece of like raw cowhide, the animalic component really comes across there and it really comes out of the leather. You can really smell the animal in there. Yeah, this has definitely a very gritty component. It's way stronger and rougher than something like Armani Privé's Noir Kogan, which I actually gave really high marks for its photorealistic nature. This is even more of that. It's again, there's something about it that comes across as wet leather. In a way, it kind of reminds me of the smell of my leather jacket after I rode my motorcycle in the rain. Once you get off the motorcycle and the jacket is sort of starting to dry, you get this especially pungent smell to it. This is a little bit more scratchy. The scent per se is scratchy, but also the texture of the leather. This comes across as a little bit suede-like. There's a lot of fiber in the leather. It's not smooth, it's not oiled. It feels like some leather that has been drying in the sun for way too long, and as soon as it's wet, it starts absorbing all that water and it starts emanating this sort of like warm, radiating smell. As per the style of Matiere Premiere, this is a fairly simplistic type of scent, absolutely not in a bad way. Again, it has this photorealistic, very direct type of imagery. There's no storytelling to this, there's nothing to it except for memory associations that you might have. For example, like the motorcycle in the rain type of ride that I have. But other than that, it's very, very straightforward. I really wouldn't be able to pick out on any of the single notes without knowing them. The birch tar and the saffron really come together and they give this beautiful rendition of leather. If you have read the notes and if you're familiar with the ingredients, you can definitely pick out on the birch tar of the bitterness of the birch tar, of the smokiness of it, and of the spiciness of the saffron, that warm spiciness that really elevates the scent profile and gives it a lot of body. As per now, the scent profile is very mid-heavy. At the top, you have some of that bitter acridness that gives it a little bit of a lift. I'm not getting much in the bottom or at the base of the fragrance. And again, this is similar to Armani Privé's Noir Kogan. The scent being fairly mid-heavy means that it's probably wearable in multiple situations, although leather as a concept is not necessarily something that you would associate to summer. Okay, time to unleash the beast, which is Cuoium. I'll be spraying this on my right arm. Unfortunately, the atomizer for this is not that great. I've been sitting on this sample for a bit, and I think that the atomizer are a little bit clogged. So I'll try to match the output of the other one with multiple sprays of this. Let's see. Yeah, barely spraying here. Wow, straight up, this is very, very animalic, especially compared to Falcon Leather. And it's surprising because I thought Falcon Leather was sort of like harsh and bitter, but this has a very, very strong fecal type of pissy component. It literally smells like an animal. It's crazy. Wow, this has a very, very vivid type of image to it, and I know that referring to a barnyard type of smell is a little bit overrated or maybe like overdone, like not very imaginative, but this is a strong depiction of some sort of a stable with horses and cattle. It smells like a live animal that's been sort of like trampling in its own poop. And for whatever reason, the poopy pissy component here smells like it's coming from a herbivore. So very much like a horse or a cow. Some other fecal components smell like sewage, and I do associate those to a lot more of a human type of smell or a little bit more of a rancid type of smell. This is has like a clean poop type of vibe, but still poopy. I really like this opening. It's so vivid, it's so clear. The leather aspect of this is completely overshadowed by these hoofs like pounding this dirt, this wet, muddy dirt. It really has this narrative aspect to it. There's something about the way Alessandro Gualtieri puts his fragrances together that they're so incredibly vivid, although they might come across as a little bit synthetic. And this one too has this a little bit of a chemical sort of vibe, but they're so narrative, so photorealistic, all of them. They immediately trigger an image. I completely realize that this aspect of Alessandro Gualtieri's fragrances might be heavily aided by the marketing. I strongly remember the promotional video for Cuoium, and although that doesn't feature any sort of animal, to my memory at least, I do remember it being very evocative, very weird, very Alessandro Gualtieri. There is definitely a connection between the two fragrances, Falcon Leather and Cuoium. That connection is the bitter, sort of a smoky aspect that comes through and that is present in the top notes of the fragrances. This top note that in Falcon Leather I described as bitter and acrid, it's actually super dry and a little bit synthetic. It kind of reminds me of that metallic artificial note in Ganymede, which really reminds me of like compressed air or some sort of like burnt air conditioning filter. It's very strange, it's pungent in a way, and it's very nose filling. The overall impression that I'm getting from Cuoium right now is that it's actually a lighter fragrance than Falcon Leather. The lightness is artificially pumped up by that pissy note. Pissy notes have this very ammonia type of smell that really elevate the fragrance. And this is something that I also highlighted in my review for Hyrax by Zoologist. And the strong ammonia component to that fragrance really elevated the scent profile and gave the rose in that fragrance a very pungent sort of gasoline-y type of smell. This sort of has the same sort of effect. Yeah, Falcon Leather is a lot more bitter. I guess that birch tar is really coming into its own. The smoky bitterness from here is much more detectable compared to Cuoium. Cuoium is actually reminding me of the opening of Nishane's Africa Olifant. That also had a very stampede type of muddy poopiness to it. And there's something about that sort of accord that adds a lot of warmth to the fragrance that really counteracts the bitterness. And Falcon Leather does not have it. It's all about the smoky bitterness from the birch tar and the spicy heaviness of the saffron. It's way simpler, but it's very, very beautiful and elegant, yet surprisingly rough. I'm not really sure if I'm getting used to the animalics or the animalic component itself is leaving the scene to make room for something else. The Orto Parisi is supposed to be a narrative about, again, the shoes of Mr. Parisi, and the idea of this fragrance is all about these shoes that are being made by this raw, primal leather, very animalic. Then the shoes are being used to work in the fields with all the manure, the earth, and the dirty components. And finally, the shoes are being polished off, they're being cleaned off, and the leather gets more supple and more elegant. So I am expecting a little bit more of an oud component in the mid-dry down to finally end up on a more oily type of refined leather aspect. Yeah, I can definitely confirm that the animalic component is toning down, the scent as a whole is becoming smoother, and we might be transitioning to a little bit more of a deeper scent that has a little bit more of a base note component to it. Falcon Leather seems to be more stable, the bitterness is edging off a tiny bit, but the scent is remarkably similar to when I first sprayed it. I say at this point it's time to take a break. I'll come back in quite a bit of time here because I feel that these fragrances have a lot to give and I can already forecast massive longevity. Okay, it's been almost 3 hours. I've accomplished a lot in this time. I've been engulfed in this beautiful, rough, gritty sillage that I'm a huge fan of. The scents sort of mix together, but they dry down very, very different one from another. Starting off with Falcon Leather, I have to say that I was not expecting this sort of transition from a Matiere Premiere. The scent became very, very smooth. It's absolutely gorgeous. There's a beautiful vanillic woody component that completely transformed the scent. The leather aspect became so smooth, it almost became a suede at this point. And the scent is almost gourmand. It's so beautiful, it's so smooth, so wearable. I can't get over how beautiful this creamy woody component is. The scent has transitioned so much that it smells like a completely different thing. It's beautiful, it's remarkable, the difference. And this actually puts something like the Armani Privé Noir Kogan completely to shame. That's a very linear, stable fragrance. Being a highly evolving, transitioning scent is not necessarily better than being a linear one. It just really all comes down to what you prefer and what you're in the mood for. Sometimes you really want to wear a fragrance which is the same in the opening as in the dry down because you want a more predictable wear experience. This is usually true for like office scents or day scents because you're not really into the mood for that massive narrative aspect. Some other times, you want to be brought on a journey. The weird thing about this Matiere Premiere is that despite it being an insanely transitioning scent, I'm not really getting much of a narrative or story. I'm not being brought on a journey. There's no falcons in here. There's nothing that is bringing me to that sort of image. And this might be due to the fact that I have zero experience with falconry or anything to do with that. But the scent smells like it's been designed to smell good. It's been designed to be a perfume, first and foremost. It has this very French approach to it. As I mentioned, the dry down for Falcon Leather on my skin is exceptionally smooth and elegant, and the scent profile itself, the way it's constructed top to bottom, might end up having a very narrow type of audience because if you like the opening, you might not like the dry down. If you like the dry down, you might not like the opening. To me, I find it incredibly interesting, the transition between the opening and the dry down, and I really do appreciate this style. But most of the audience who is actually into transition, into the narrative aspect, will definitely gravitate towards Cuoium. Quum has been definitely a wild ride. I still feel that the fragrance has a lot to give and it's not in its final dry down form yet. I am currently in a very oudy, stinky type of a smell phase. It kind of reminds me of the sample that I tried of Stercus. That is a very dirty, very earthy type of a patchouli smell. Very animalic in a way, kind of poopy, but poopy in a very smooth way, kind of like the dry down of Africa Olifant. The scent is beautiful. It's harsh. It's a difficult wear. This is not something that I would wear to the office or in public specifically. Quoium is more of a meditative type of a lonely fragrance. Something that I would wear in the house, something that I would pair with a good movie or video game. Maybe something like No Country for Old Men or a video game like Red Dead Redemption 2. These are awesome pairs for this, and I feel that Quoium would really enhance the experience in a sensorial level. About 3 hours in, the fragrance still retains a lot of its sharpness. The ammonia component is giving the whole tone range a lot of lift, and I feel that it's detracting a little bit from the bassiness of the fragrance. Yes, there's an oud component. There's also some sort of a stinky type of a earthy vanillic component, but these are all very light, especially compared to other fragrances that dry down very heavy and drony like Africa Olifant. That dries down to a very ambery type of a vanillic aspect. It's very deep, very subtle, like a low-hanging fog. This is definitely a lot more voluminous and airy. Now, on to the narrative component of this. I really wasn't getting a lot of images of shoes, but I can't really fault the fragrance for this because that's a very specific type of image, and most of the other Orto Parisi give you this vague rendition of something which you tend to associate to something else that you know with the imaginary collective. So for example, Megamare doesn't give you anything specific. It's more of a rumbling type of sea experience. And also Terroni, it's a vague sort of like earthy transition from being a very smoky volcano to like a very fertile type of earth. Asking a fragrance to depict a shoe is a little bit too much, but I am getting sort of the idea of the life of a leather accessory or garment. It's almost decomposing in a way because it started out very animalic, almost bloody to a degree, like very fresh from the animal, and now it's earthy, it's dirty, and in the deep dry down, for all I know, it might actually go down to that oily, very refined type of leather. I can't tell. This is a first impression comparison video. I'm not going to touch upon the dry down like 6-7 hours in. I just don't have time for that. I might get a bottle of Quoium straight up because I really like it. I really like the narrative aspect, and in that case, I will definitely be reviewing it completely and fully. Let's quickly touch upon my forecasted practicalities for these two. Longevity, first and foremost, is massive on both of these scents. Despite Falcon Leather being in its deep dry down, I can still definitely smell it off my skin. It's beautiful. It's a lot more subtle and not as acrid or harsh, but it's still very, very present. Use cases for these two are actually quite puzzling. These are very different scents in the way they're constructed, in their intent, but surprisingly, they both transition so much that this really impacts wearability. On one side, Falcon Leather opens up harsh, gritty, and bitter. If you like that type of opening, you might want to pair it with a little bit more of an evening type of scenario. Dressed up, it would really create a beautiful contrast. Despite this being quite potent and aggressive, Falcon Leather really never comes across as unappealing or obnoxious. This is a stark contrast with Cuoium, where the opening is definitely something you would not want to wear in public because people would think that you either pissed your pants or you stepped on poop or something like that. It's very, very unfriendly in the opening specifically. I think that if you were to be a fan of the dry down for Falcon Leather, you would be kind of out of luck because it's really difficult to time the dry down wear. It's not like you can spray this 3 hours before going out and then hoping that you're gonna be hitting the heart of the party at the dry down. It's really difficult to pull this off. And if you like the dry down of this, actually, I would probably just detour you towards something else that's a lot more wearable. The mid dry down to dry down for Cuoium is definitely a lot more wearable than the opening. But again, you're not wearing this for the dry down. You're wearing this for the transition, for the narrative aspect. It's really hard to time a specific moment where this fragrance is wearable because you never know how it will change, how it will be perceived by the public around you. This is a very powerful scent in all its stages. So if you want to go the oudi aspect, if you want to go that more earthy vanilla aspect that's in the mid, again, I would probably direct you to something else, which is more characterized by that aspect there. Even something like King Blue by Amouage has a beautiful dry down that is strongly resembling the mid dry down of Cuoium. Overall, these are two absolutely beautifully astonishing fragrances. On one side, we have one of the best transitioning leather fragrances I have ever smelled. Still very wearable, still very elegant. It puts the leather component of something like Ombre Nomade completely to shame. On the other hand, we have an Orto Parisi. Very harsh, very blunt, very narrative, very, very strong. This could be easily a statement piece fragrance to wear every now and then when you want to be especially intimidating in public, when you want people around you to move out of the way. It's so bossy, it's so potent, and so brutish. Just to conclude, I'm ecstatic of how well the pairing of these two came together. Very different approaches, surprisingly similar outcomes. Beautiful, evocative, complex, absolutely worth your time. If you like this type of content, if you like my approach to video, feel free to subscribe. It always helps the channel and it's massively appreciated. If you want to interact with me, leave a comment, suggestion, opinion, or anything else down below. I always reply and I always keep the conversation open. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for your time. Never take it for granted. Many more videos to come as per usual. See ya and cheers.